I'm talking about online sales of a improvement course that I put together off the back of the golf. So that's how I then put all of this together. So ultimately, this is a little bit of a Twitter story, it's a little bit of a Facebook story, but it's about all of these different factors and how I then spun them off each other to try and spin this thing up into something that would ultimately potentially hit #1 on Amazon and stay there for about 9 months in terms of the golf category. It was the #1 sports book on Amazon for over a month too. I'll come to those stats in a second. But that's the theory. So, and I'll come back to this, but anything that you're doing, or anything that I do within any of the other businesses that I run now, and anything that I do within clients whenever they're saying, I want new customers, I want any of these things, 'cause I do a lot of work within coffee shops, that's sort of the other thing that I do, needs to be, what is the outcome? So I think it was Ian was saying it earlier on, yeah, we need to sort out our website, we need to do some marketing. That's what you get, particularly within the coffee shop business, all the time. They've no concept of what their outcome might be. So you then identify down, what are the outcomes of what I'm trying to do within this one thing? Now this simply applies for one part of my golf business, and it's about the part of it, and it's about getting new customers. So I have a totally different version of this that I use for stroking existing customers. Totally different versions for other businesses, totally different versions for how I run my coffee shop business, totally different versions for speaking business, consulting business, or coffee shops themselves as opposed to what I do with coffee shops. So you look at all of your different, if you go back to sort of the basic theories of marketing, price, product, place, and promotion. So you've got your 4 Ps of marketing, and outside of that you then have your your marketing mix. And because I did a marketing degree years ago, and you learn these things, you have no idea really what it means, but you think that it's things like PR, sales promotion, direct marketing, direct selling, and you've got about 5 or 6 of those things in those days. There now is a vast amount more, and particularly if you look back to what Richard said earlier on, I'll come back to that. He gave a huge amount of examples earlier on. Spoke to a number of people at lunch there, and there was definitely some sense of, my goodness, that is a vast amount of information. I don't know where to start. This is where you start. You start with your outcome. So as Ian was saying, you start with the customer and you work back. To an extent, I'm thinking all the time about my customer, whether it's an old boy in the States who can't understand what I'm saying, or any of the other types of golfer that I'm considering. And then I work all of these individually and work my way around how I might be driving people through to that outcome. And once I've got them there, there's a whole different concept as to how I then sell them on afterwards. I'll come to that in a second. But this, as I say, if you look at my career, you see there's been a lot of chaos along the way. This is one of the things that I learned that helps me to control that chaos. And if I'm trying to do anything, I focus on this. So it's tributaries into one initial outcome. Your outcome may not be getting email addresses. Your initial outcome may possibly be, depending on what your businesses are, may be the initial sale. A low-priced sale or something, and then you look what you do after that. But if you're looking for an initial outcome, and then you apply this. So that's basically how I worked this. Within this initial business, what I was doing was I did a lot of work within Twitter. So I started to look at, I wanted to try and drive the sales of the book because I knew there would be all sorts of benefits off the back of that. PR benefits. I would be able to spin it across to a lot of these other things as well. Talks, books, articles, all of that comes off the back of generating some form of platform. So if we come back to the publisher saying, you, wee fella from Northern Ireland, have no platform, certainly in relation to the Wayne Rooneys of this world, who we've decided to give $4.5 million to, you need to create a platform. Social media gives you the ability to create a platform. And it gives you the ability to create a platform with a bit of work that can be very, very focused in on the people that are your customers. So my Twitter focus, there's my Twitter page. It's been updated a little bit, but basically this is the way it's structured. So that's a picture that I had taken just when I finished that challenge. There's not a huge amount there, but this is the key point. This is a link through to a squeeze page, and I'll come on to that in a second. But what I was trying to do there was build up a large list of people who would follow me and want to be part of that story. So I had already worked with a number of folk within the industry in terms of, I'd already built up connections with PR folk. I'd already built up some connections in terms of the golfing industry, so I was able to start to get some followers fairly quickly. But in Twitter, if you go out into Twitter in the initial stages and follow a lot of people who are within, if you go and follow the people, so we'll stick with the golf thing for the moment, but your industry, your businesses will all be different. You go in there and you follow the people who are arguably following the leaders. So, Tiger Woods doesn't have a Twitter account, but if he did, you'd be going in there and following the people who follow Tiger. There are a number of golf, back in those days when I was doing this, first of all, which is about 3 years, well, no, sorry, it's only about 2 years ago. I was following anybody that had, this was very early on days in Twitter. I was following anybody who was starting to have Twitter accounts. There's a golfer called Stuart Sink who you may or may not have heard of, but he has a very big Twitter following. I don't quite know why, but you knew that those people who are following Stuart Sink are golfers. So you go and follow them, and depending on the content and how interesting you make your page to be, between 25 and 50% of the people who you follow will follow you back. So to begin with, you follow lots of people, you try and put up lots of good, interesting information, not all about me, but about, tips that are going on out there, comment on golf, hopefully with a little bit of, character behind the whole thing. Social media needs personality. You cannot go out there in a dry way. It needs personality in the same way that it absolutely doesn't need selling. So you have to try and work very hard to get this sort of, to get the person who you've followed to click on your page and see, all right, that guy looks interesting. There's an interesting wee story. Darren Clark and Sam Torrance both said it was impossible, but I took 33 strokes off in 362 days to finally break par. My book, Dream On, is for sale on Amazon. So people will come on and they'll see that and they'll think, that's an amazing golf story. I'll follow that guy. And hopefully they'll look at some of the things that I'm talking about here and think, that's interesting. Now that is a retweet with a guy called Jason Sobel, who's a big golf journalist. So that's another little tweak that you do out there. You follow all the golf journalists and you keep regurgitating their information. And that became a very, very key part of this for me. I was able to make very good connections with golf journalists in a way that I had not been able to do before. And if you keep doing that in a gentle way to golf journalists, don't stalk them, but if you help them out, unless they're the massive guys. I actually never got anything back from him. I just put that up there as an example. But a percentage of the golf journalists that I did help out and work with and retweet their stuff suddenly then start to think, oh, you're that guy. And then I'll come on to this. But they started doing PR stories about me, and that helped to grow the whole thing. So my outcome, if we go back to the previous slide, was to create, this is it here. My Twitter outcome was to get people through to this page. That is effectively the main page for my golf business. Now, it's a slightly odd website because there's actually very little there. It's purely a credibility device in terms of, I'm the guy that did all of these things here. I was in all of these magazines in the BBC. Here's the main gist in terms of a headline, in terms of me driving things through. This is about a 1.5-minute video of me being slapped in the face by my wife and by my daughter because they were so irritated by me by doing this challenge. And the message is, I did it the hard way. You don't have to. Stick your name and email address in there and I'll tell you how I did it. So I'm driving people through to that page to give them lots of free information. And to a very large extent, the free information that I give away is pretty much the best stuff that I have. So you need to, within internet communications of this type, be very comfortable within information of giving away your best stuff and feeling comfortable that you're giving it away, but you're striking up the relationship, and a percentage of those people will want to have more to do with you. So be very comfortable with giving lots and lots of your best stuff away. Now, if you are selling physical products and things, you think, well, I don't understand what that is. We don't have lots of great information. You can always get lots of good information. It's very easy to get good information out there. And you need to maybe rethink the business in terms of how you can get that information that is of benefit to your customers. So if we go back to what Ian was saying earlier on, start with the customer at the end. So begin with what the customer's thinking at the end. I can't remember exactly what he said. But you need to think about what that customer is thinking about and the things that they want. And then you give them that stuff and then gradually and slowly push them through various emails onto buying your stuff. But nowhere here am I saying, buy my stuff, it's really great. All I'm saying is, I'm going to give you lots of information, and this comes directly through from that page. So they don't go through directly and get anything until they've given me their email address. Now that's the way. I have lots and lots of different squeeze pages out there for lots of different types of information that I've got in the golf market. But that's the main page. That's the Break Power Blueprint page. So this is the initial sort of, I don't want to use the word outcome because my outcome was different, but this is what happened to begin with. I built up this following. I managed to work hard in terms of creating a following out there, give out good information. I managed to make myself look like somebody that people might want to follow in terms of information. And then one evening one Sunday before the book had ever been published, and you should see that's even the book doesn't look like that. That's the book there. So this was before it had ever been launched. I noticed that by tweeting a couple of things about the book and how excited I was, other people were retweeting that because I'd presented myself as this interesting character who was getting his book out. And the title had not been released, but it had reached number 10 in the golf books on Amazon. So I suddenly thought, this is really interesting. There really is something here that potentially could drive the sales of my book, as long as I'm relatively gentle about it. And to be honest, I wasn't as gentle in those days about pushing it as I would be now, because this was the very early days in Twitter and the rules kind of hadn't really been established. So the book hadn't come out yet. I had tweeted a few times about it, and we get up to number 10, and I suddenly thought, right, I need to work at this. So one Sunday then, a few weeks after that, when it came out, was it? Yeah, it was not out of stock, but it was available. So we've got the new cover there. I'd had one review at that stage. It was literally just out, and that was probably, it wasn't my mum, but it was somebody I knew. It was literally go and put a review up, so that I had started to have some credibility. And I went on one Sunday night. You can see now, customers who bought this also bought. There's one other book there. It literally wasn't out there, and I got to. You maybe can't read that because it's so far down, but that's number 1 in the golf category. So I hit number 1 in golf on Amazon. Number 557 overall, on that one evening, simply by tweeting. Because what happened was, I went on and said, this is really exciting, the book is out there now, this has fulfilled a lifelong dream, all of that stuff, which is all true, and I'm really excited about it. Those people who had been building the relationship, who had lots and lots of their own followers, said, look, this guy's got his book out now, you can finally go and buy it. And then it spiraled up to number 1. So what I did then, of course, was then I snagged this. I took this picture. And I then knew that if you come back to my original sources of the Nile concept, I knew that this was quite a good story. This was going to be a business story because nobody had really done this yet. Nobody had managed to properly promote a book through Twitter. So what I did was then I spun it. I went straight across to PR. Now the interesting thing about my marketing background comes through from one side, which is direct marketing, and the other side is my wife, who ran a PR company. Still does PR to an extent, but generally just for me. But so we understood PR and we understood direct marketing, and that's how I've sort of ended up in this sort of, well, standing here today telling you about how I got the book working. But those were the main channels, and then I use other ones too. So I spun it onto PR, both online and offline. So this guy here, bizarrely, lives in somewhere with the most remote town in the world, which is somewhere in the west coast of Australia, and but he's originally from Lisburn, County Antrim, and he had seen me as a wee a fellow Northern Irish boy, and thought, that's interesting. This guy's on that. I want to support him, and he retweeted this whole thing around. He kept pushing it for me. And then what he did was he wrote an article on his blog about it. So I got lots of people covering the fact that it had been written, that I'd got to number 1 on Amazon off the fact of Twitter, because it was an interesting story. And that's the Belfast Telegraph. I got a lot of stuff, I got lots of other PR about it. But so offline, classic, pick up the phone. It's the Belfast Telegraph. We've understood that you've done this thing. Then we'd send them out a press release, obviously. We've understood that you've done this. Can we do a story on it? So you get that normal, traditional sense of PR as well as all the online stuff. So then obviously what I do is I keep spinning this offline stuff online again. So I then put that onto the blog, and I then managed to get more PR off the fact that I'd got that there. So you're spinning all of these things. I'm sending it out to the email lists that I'm building all the time in terms of saying, hey, I got it to number 1. Really delighted about it, And a sort of a soft sales message within there as well, along the lines of, if you haven't bought it yet, buy it, but that's quite subtle. And then I'm giving them good information as well. So to come back, what I'm saying is, my outcome was to drive people, through to my initial outcome was to get the email addresses. So all of this is purely about promoting the book.